Started. Thanks again for everybody who's joining right now. I see that we've got a few folks still hopping on. So again, thanks for your time today. I am just absolutely so excited about this webinar and to get into this information with everyone today. Some quick webinar logistics. We have a lot of folks that are joining this webinar. So if anybody has any questions, please use that side panel on your dashboard there where it shows questions. Feel free to ask questions also throughout today's presentation. So at any time, if you have any kind of questions, I'll be monitoring that and answering them as they come in. And also I'll do a bit of a Q&A session at the end. So everybody should be able to see my screen here. Again, if not, let me know. But I'm excited to get right into it. Today, we're going to be covering Appulate's annual survey. And if anybody here has known Appulate for some time, you know that we have a massive network of agents who use our platform. And every year now for about the last 5 years, we've been conducting surveys of agents to understand a little bit more about these agents, what they do as far as lines of business they write, distribution trends, overall trends, not just specific to technology, but of course their book of business, what kind of premium do they write, submissions, renewals, all of that. We're going to get into a lot of that today. And again, if you have any questions as we go along, please let me know because we've got a lot of information to cover today, and I want to make sure I get through all of it. So we're going to get started now with just a quick overview of what you can expect in today's presentation. First of all, we conducted this survey back in November of last year. We always do it near the end of the year. We go through all of the results. We give out some prizes to some agents. And this year we got a massive response back from these agents. And I'm going to go into what those demographics look like, who these agents were, and all of that. And that's going to be the first section of this. Then we'll also go into submission data and lines of business, agent preferences and distribution trends, and then industry statistics, as well as outside resources that I've been able to pull more data on to give a little bit more background and interesting information from other surveys done by similar companies. Another point here I wanted to bring up, at the end of this, everyone's going to get an email. First of all, I'm going to send out a recording of today's webinar, as well as a brief survey. Here are the questions. I'm not asking a lot, but if you guys don't mind going through that and answering some of these questions, it would be so incredibly helpful. This year, we're going to go and do even more surveys. I think we might add another survey this year. So if there's anything that I didn't cover in this survey, something that would have been really helpful to you or that you found helpful in the data, all of that feedback is extremely valuable to me. So please check that out in your email, as well as an email from me. If you want to meet specifically with me to discuss any of this or possibly how we could work together or collaborate on any of this, please feel free to reach out, and I'll have my contact information at the end of this and as well in my email that I'm going to send out. So real quickly about Appulate and who we are. I'm not going to talk too much about Appulate because today's all about that survey, but I did want to give a little bit of background. Well, we're a technology provider in the insurance space. We've been doing this for nearly 20 years. Our platform is designed to be a place that agents can move data to directly from their management systems and submit to hundreds of markets, whether they're carriers, MGAs, wholesalers across dozens of lines of business. So that gives you a really brief high level about who we are. And again, we've got about 300,000 users on our platform, massive subscriber base, and we're able to tap into that at great lengths to get some good information, both from the survey and within our system, to combine everything and try to get a good snapshot of what's going on in the industry. So again, I'm going to skip past a little bit of this. If you guys are interested in any of that, please reach out to me. But I really want to focus on today's data, which is all about this annual agent survey. There's just an unbelievable amount of statistics and information here that I hope that you all find very valuable. I certainly get very excited about this each year. And this year in particular was the largest survey that we've ever conducted. We sent this out to over 100,000 agents. We verified all of the emails as authentic, and as agents were going through the survey, before they could start, they would have to complete some sort of verification process as well, like a CAPTCHA or something like that, just so that we're not getting any bad reports of information in the system. We were able to cover all 50 states in the data. About 16,000 agents in all 50 states were represented in the data that you're going to see in this survey. And of course, we have a tremendous more amount of data in our system from all of these hundreds of thousands of agents who use our system. We also wanted to get a good idea of the demographics of these agents, and I think this really helps, again, paint a good picture of who's answering these questions, and then based on some of the other answers to questions, we can assess different pieces of information. So right here, what we're looking at is the agency size. So we just asked the respondents, how big is your agency? And you'll be able to see right here what those percentages were. On average, it seems like most agencies that responded were about 8 to 9 agents large. 32% of the respondents were what I would consider regular users of Appulate's platform. We're going to go into a little bit more details on that here in just a second. And this was definitely the largest response to date. In fact, this is the largest sample size that I've been able to find in the entire industry. There are a lot of companies that do surveys, and we were just so lucky to have such a large response. And if anybody is able to find anything else that's similar in size or larger, please send it my way. I get very excited about this kind of thing. So we asked agents a number of different questions. One of those questions were, what state do you write in? So here's a list of the top 20. This shows, again, not necessarily where they're based, but where they actually write business in. We wanted to get at least a good sense of where these agents were and to ensure that we were covering all states here. Additionally, within our system, we have a huge amount of users, and this matched up pretty well with where agents were actually located. So if you wanted a little bit more information on where agent locations actually are, where are they actually writing business, I'd be happy to go into that in a little bit more detail for you. I mentioned that only a certain percentage were regular users of Appulate. This was really important to us, especially this year. I wanted to make sure that the results that we got were as unbiased as possible, especially since we're asking agents questions about distribution, how they find their markets, where do they process submissions, that sort of thing. And we didn't want to only survey big Appulate users. We wanted to make sure we were trying to reach out to folks who hopefully don't even know what our system is and don't use it at all. And we were successful in that. About 15% of the agent survey do no business through Appulate whatsoever, while 53% of them do at least about 25% of their business through Appulate. So I thought this was a pretty good, well-rounded sample size of agents. Additionally, again, you're going to see some things peppered in here with outside reports. I try to do a bunch of research and find other surveys that we could collaborate with some other folks on and at least pull some additional data that we weren't able to get or we didn't ask about this year. One of those right here, done by Agent Methods, showed that agent demographics are changing in the industry quite a bit. We didn't ask a lot of really deep questions about how happy they are at their job or what age they are, or anything like that. We're really focused on distribution and insurance specific things, but a number of surveys out there are showing that demographics are changing quite a bit, with the average age about 45 years old. And in the next 10 years, we see that there's a growing trend of more insurance agents into the industry. So I thought this was pretty interesting. Again, everybody's going to be able to get a copy of this if you'd like. So if you want to check out any of these sources through these links, you're more than welcome to check that out. So again, feel free to ask any questions on that. Some of these I'm going to go through pretty quickly, but others I'm going to spend a little bit more time on. So we're going to hop right into agent submission data. I definitely get pretty excited about this piece of it. Because I haven't been able to find a lot of information around submission data. And the first thing I'll start with is new business. So we asked agents, how much new business does your agency write each month? And what you're going to see here is a comparison of 2021's results and 2022's results. Overall in the industry, and you're going to see this keep coming up, there's been an overall hardening of the market. Agents are submitting more business overall, premiums are rising, things like that. And I think there's a story that's going to be told throughout this data that's showing how agents are now interacting with markets, how they're choosing to work with markets, and possibly why we're seeing an increase in new business. This one wasn't as different. So we saw 4% more submissions in the 11 to 50 per month category and 4% less in the 1 to 5. So there's definitely some pretty healthy growth in this. The one that definitely changed quite a bit is this next one here, which was renewals. So it does seem like, I think with the rise of price increase, a premium increase of business, insureds are going to agents more often, especially for commercial lines, and agents are going out to more types of markets. And we'll get into that and expand on that a little bit more, but we saw a huge increase in renewals. So this showed about 11.6% more renewals in the 21 plus category per month and 12.37% less in the 1 to 10 per month. So this is telling us there's a 4% growth in true new business, but definitely a massive increase in renewal business. So agents seem to be shopping their current risks more frequently, which is certainly something interesting to pay attention to. The next slide I've got here is amount of premium agents write annually. So I've got some information around actual true submitted premium to the NAIC, but we wanted to get a little bit more of a breakdown of what agencies tend to do. So again, just combined with how many submissions and how many renewals the average agency is doing per month compared to what actual premiums look like, I think gives us a lot of really helpful information. What you're looking at here, by the way, is 2021's results. The next slide I'm going to show you was this past year. And the reason I'm spending a little time on this is because when we first started asking this question a couple of years ago, we weren't sure really how to ask this question or where to put these limits at. So we capped it at 20 million plus, and we just saw a large number there. So the weighted mean on this was $7.7 million per agency. This past year, we included more options for them to choose from, and I think we're going to do the same thing this year. I'd really like to see a full bell curve without as many responses in the 50 million plus category, but we did see about 8.75 in that category, which rose our mean premium written per agency to 10.8 million annually. So this was really interesting. I mean, this could be just due to more accuracy around this. It could be that there is a rise in amount of premium that agencies are writing. Both of these things, I think, contribute to this quite a bit. So when I do check some outside resources, what we found based on the NAIC market share report of last year, there was an increase in premiums written by P&C agents by about $40 billion in 2022. And based on rough numbers of about 36,000 agencies that exist in the P&C space, the average mean is about 10.25 million per agency. So I think we're safe to say that it's above 10 million, maybe 10.5 million per agency. And of course, that's all going to be different based on size. And just to kind of give you an idea of what I mean there, we did see about a 6.5% increase in the 20 million plus category. 91% of agents say that their agency writes less than $50 million a year, and 75% of agencies write less than $10 million a year. So this does give a little bit more insight to what these agents are actually producing. And again, I hope we're able to continue to track this and find a little bit more specific information about this. The next slide I'll show you here is, again, outside resources. We, again, did see a direct premium written increase by nearly 10%. So I mentioned that before, and that was based on this market share report from last year. If you haven't seen that, there's some links in here that you can check that out. It's a pretty extensive report and has a lot of really, really good detailed information in that. So I would encourage you to check that out. Their assessment was based on the growth was based on a number of different things, including rates increase and a hardening of a market, inflation, and increased frequency and severity of catastrophic events. So nearly all major lines of business saw premium increase. Additionally to that, and what I'm going to share with you here in just a second, we saw that agents are writing more types of lines of business by far. So that was really interesting. So that's a really good segue actually into this next section, which is agent lines of business. So we talked a little bit about what agents are doing as far as just pure numbers, how many submissions, renewals. But the question that I always get, and the one thing I love that we track, is what actual lines of business are agents writing? So we ask the agents, what lines of business does your agency write on a regular basis? So I'm going to show you some charts here, and I'll go through those. If anybody wants to connect with me and you have a product, we can dig into that a little bit more, and I'm happy to show you some trends, because we have been asking this question for several years now, and we've been improving it as we go. This is an example of the top 10 that you're looking at here. You'll see the line of business. That first percentage is how many of these agents say they write this on a regular basis. So 79% of agencies reported write commercial auto, for example, and that second percentage is how much that's actually changed since last year. So similarly to the rate increases that are happening across all lines of business, we actually saw that about 87% of all lines of business saw an equal or greater trend compared to last year. I think so far that's been the largest amount of equal or greater trend that we've seen at all. And cyber, for example, was the only line of business in the top 10 growth trends for 2 years in a row. So that was extremely interesting. So I'm going to spend just a couple minutes here just going through all of these lines of business that we ask questions about. And again, happy to spend some time with you specifically if you write any of these lines of business and would like some more information around that. So here are the top 10, the top 20. Again, you'll see a recording of this, and I'm happy to send this over to you if you'd like to check this out. Here are the top 40. And I know this probably isn't giving you a lot of time to take a good look into this, but again, feel free to reach out and I'll certainly send this over to you. But as you can see, as we go through this, the majority of these lines of business did see an increase. We did add a couple lines of business that we asked questions about, like life insurance and group health. We didn't ask about those last year, so I wanted to make a note that we did add that, and I don't have a trend there, so if you see new, that's what that means. And here are the remaining. So we asked about 76 of these. If there are any lines of business that we missed in here, I mean, we definitely asked the agent if there was something else that was not included on here that they write. We didn't see any on there that really stood out. There are certainly some specialty products, and folks came back, and I think a few of them didn't see the response in there, so we added those in manually. But I think this does a pretty good job of covering most of them. But again, we're always adding a couple in here that we might have missed or we want to ask about. So feel free to, in the survey I send out, add that in there as a recommendation. I'll be happy to add that line of business on the next survey. Okay, so here are the largest changes in percentages. So what you're looking at here is actually several years of data. So we're looking at 2020 to 2021 trends on the left-hand side. These are the top 10 trends. And I can pull any of these for any line of business that is listed. And then 2021 to 2022, and here are those trends. So cyber liability, again, that really stood out in a big way. It was in the top 3 last year. It still was in the top 3 this year, taking second place, so still most trending, which is really interesting. And based on the IBIS World Cyber Liability Insurance information, there's a source there. They're seeing a similar growth trend from 2018 to 2023 of about 9% on average, and that's increased especially over the last couple of years. So this is pretty in line with what other folks are seeing in the industry as well. It was really interesting in 2020 to 2021 to see how some of these lines seemed a bit reactive to just kind of what was going on just generally, maybe in the news or with certain lines of business that were newer, like cyber liability and agents being introduced to new lines that they may not have written before, but things like truckers, motor carrier, there was a big need for truckers at that time, and writing that business, and there certainly still is. Motorcycle was very interesting. That actually surprised me quite a bit until I talked to somebody who writes motorcycle insurance, and sure enough, same with uh, personal watercraft as well. So we saw that recreational vehicles and things like this. This year, we certainly saw an interesting top 10 trends lines here. So if you are somebody who writes excess, inland marine, personal inland marine, some of these other lines here, please reach out. I'd love to learn a little bit more about why we might be seeing some of these lines of business trending so aggressively. Otherwise, feel free to use this information as you can, because this is certainly very interesting, especially things like EPLI, surety, et cetera. So this is great. One thing that I like to mention is, of course, Appulate is a distribution platform. So we're always focused on trying to work with carriers, MGAs, wholesalers to put their products on our platform and get a good sense of, hey, what are agents actually writing? Is there going to be good ROI on this? Are they going to submit? What is that going to look like? And I see a couple questions coming through, so I'm going to take those here in just a second before I move too much further. But for example, on the left-hand side, when these are the top 10 questions, or I'm sorry, the top 10 survey responses for the top 10 lines of business written, I want to see those obviously matching up within the Appulate system. So our number one is workers' comp, but that's number 4 on the list. So it always tells us, hey, we need to have some more products in here. Clearly, agents are submitting this kind of business, and there's a need for these types of markets. So let me take a look here real quick at some questions that have come through, because yeah, this is a very important section and I don't want to skip through this too quick. So the first question that I've got here, does truckers motor carrier mean trucking auto liability or physical damage or both? That's a great question. I've looked into this a little bit because I know there are some things that distinguish those different lines of business, although they sometimes go hand in hand. So we're kind of at the mercy of what the agent is thinking about at the time when they answer this. So if they see something like trucking, they may be thinking that that includes motor carrier, physical damage, et cetera. But we did ask certain questions in here. So let me see if I can, or we asked about this. We asked about motor truck cargo. So that was on there specifically. Truckers, motor carrier, which is a line of business. This is all lines of business as defined typically by Accord. So we're trying to use something a bit more standard as we're going through this. And let's see what else we had. Let's keep on trucking. Here we go. I think that's it. I mean, there's contents and storage. There's some things that are kind of adjacent to that, but yeah, I think that those are the ones that really covered that pretty specifically. Yeah, so again, you may have to just kind of go off of that and do the best you can with it, because of course, again, it's just kind of, we're asking these agents what they think, and it really just depends on their thoughts as they're going through those questions. But that's a great question. So and of course, transportation, not just trucking, may be included in things like commercial auto, for example. Okay, good. So how can we get a copy of the deck or recording? Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to send that out after this webinar. Everybody's going to get an email with a recording from this, and I'm happy to send this PowerPoint over. So feel free to respond to me. That way I'm not putting too many things in the email, and I'll be happy to send over this PowerPoint deck just as it is. And I realized I wasn't sharing my screen here, so let me kind of go back. Here on number 33 and 34, that's what I was referring to for motor truck cargo and truckers motor carrier. So that's where we saw that. Cool. So it looks like in the top 10, truckers motor carriers, what was number 1 for last time we conducted this. Okay, cool. So great. So the next little piece in this section here is outside resources. Again, this was based on how frequently agents actually submit and write these lines, but there's a lot of good data out there about actual net premiums. So this is also a really good way for us to kind of check some of our numbers to see if we're in line or just drastically off. And I'm thankful that we've been pretty in line with what we're seeing. everything's been very consistent and seems very accurate. There's a couple sources here. One is the NAIC, again, just talking about actual TrueNet premiums. This was 2021. They haven't published yet the 2022 as far as I can tell, but I'll get that updated once they do. And then we also were able to see just essentially how much business is actually commercial lines versus personal lines and combined. And so that seems to stay pretty consistent regardless of what source you tend to go to. So that was definitely interesting. Okay, so the next slide that I've got on here, again, another outside resource, the last one in this section here. This was actually really interesting. So I know there's always kind of anecdotal conversations around, what is the actual need for an insurance agent, especially in this space. I think especially on personal lines, these pie charts are completely flipped. This is all about commercial premium, and we've got a couple sources down there if you want to check this out. But it seems like, of course, most insureds for personal lines tend to go directly to the market or carrier to get a quote. But on commercial line side, it's quite different. 77.4% in 2021 and 85% in 2022. So insureds seem to be going to insurance agents more frequently. And there may be a number of reasons for this, but of course, if we're able to empower agents with more quote options, more market selection, faster quote turnaround, things like that, those are the things that they're looking for, which I've got a lot of information around that. But I think that this does increase the need for an insurance agent. It makes them more valuable, and we're certainly seeing that in the data. Great. So the last main section here is agent preferences and distribution trends. This is the last section of this, except some outside research in here, which I've added as well. But this is probably my favorite piece of this. I definitely am a geek about agent preferences and distribution specifically. So there was a lot of information that we've been able to collect. This was really one of the main reasons we started conducting surveys like this several years ago when we started. So we've been able to really track some interesting trends through the industry. So I'm going to get right into that. So the first thing that I bring up here is, what types of markets do you as an agent want to work with? That was a question that we asked. In 2020, for example, about half, like 51% of agents actually said they prefer working with carriers directly. In 2021, we saw this shift quite a bit, and it was really exciting to see this data transition in such a big way, where 50% of agents were essentially saying all market types are good. We don't care who gives us a quote, just get us a quote. And carriers decreased to about 37%. So this was pretty surprising. So 50% of agents just didn't care, and then the other 50% had some sort of preference, with PEO and specialty at a pretty small percentage, and MGAs and wholesale brokerages taking up only about 10%. So what's happened, and this is something that we're not the only ones tracking this and finding some really interesting data on. This has been pretty consistent also with other folks tracking this as well, is agents, as they're transitioning to different types of technology that they're using, they're interacting with new markets, they're just kind of submitting out there like they did in 2021 and say, hey, whoever can give me a quote, give me a quote. Now we're seeing that there's an actual huge preference for companies like specialty markets and PEOs, which both of those take up about 20% now, MGAs at about 14%, wholesale brokerages at about 17%, carriers continue to decline at about 30%. And everybody's got a kind of a different opinion on why this is happening, because I think there's just so many factors to consider between, again, just utilization of certain technology, developing APIs, instant or quicker quoting, access to the actual market through whatever their appointment process may be and how strict or difficult that may be to continue, and then just purely even ease of access with quoting. So going onto an online portal or completing proprietary apps is something that agents certainly don't like as much, especially if they have to enter the same information multiple times, submit, and then they still don't have transparency of whether or not that risk is actually going to be written. And many times, if, let's say, a carrier can't write something, now what do you do? And so when agents, which now tend to be on distribution platforms, not just Appulate, but many other ones, if they can access multiple types of markets, new types of markets, that sort of thing, they definitely seem to be very interested in that and able to service their insureds quite quite a lot better. So I think that we're going to continue to see some of these trends continue over the next couple years. Although I think we're just going to see just more diversity here, and some of this may stay somewhat similar. But yeah, I'll be very interested to see how this goes next year for sure. The next piece that I've got is how do agents actually find markets to work with? So we know that what they're writing, we know what types of markets they prefer, but how do they actually find these markets to work with? And again, we're looking at a comparison of 2021 to 2022, and we're seeing some things shift and move, but this has stayed pretty consistent. Although the things that really stood out to me on this were in-person events. So I think with lack of restrictions with in-person events, especially over the last year or so, there has been a gradual increase in networking and events and conferences. That certainly has increased. We do have to consider, though, if agents have been working with markets for a long time, they're going to be answering how they originally found that market. So that's something important to consider here as well. But we are seeing some trends. Another trend that we're seeing is quote rating systems. So when we ask like what types of quote rating systems that agents use, Appulate scores at about 70% of those, with other folks being like Vertafore platforms, et cetera. So about 10% or so use a quote rating system to find their market. So that's been gradually increasing. That has stayed steadily above search engines, and for the first time ever, about 2 points higher than all of search engines combined. So that was really interesting. So if your marketing team is focused on things like SEO and Google ads and social media networking and marketing, then this is probably pretty important to pay attention to, because clearly that's a big piece of it, at about 12.5%. But between systems like Appulate and quote rating systems, we're talking about over 15% of agents. That's how they're finding their markets to work with specifically. So yeah, this is pretty diverse. If you're not hitting all of these, you're going to be missing out on at least somewhat of a section of this pie chart. So that was really interesting. And referrals has always been pretty massive on here too. Last year that was the largest, and that stayed pretty consistent. And they found me. Of course, that's also an important one as well. All right. And I'm still looking at that question bar. So if you guys have any questions on this, please don't hesitate. So more questions that we asked that were a little bit more specific. We asked agents, do you prefer working with multiple markets on a single platform or through a markets dedicated portal? And again, considering kind of the size of agencies, the market types that they prefer to work with, that kind of thing, I think that really tells a story with this quite a bit. Although even when we saw numbers like only 30% of agents prefer to work with a carrier directly, that did seem pretty in line with the 35% that were saying that they prefer going to a markets direct portal. Everybody else, 65%, which this number has stayed exactly the same both years in a row, and to the decimal point, it was kind of interesting. 65% say they prefer shopping multiple markets on a single platform in kind of a shopping mall style, whatever that may look like. So that does make sense and is pretty in line with the growing trends of various distribution platforms that have been available and connecting to various market APIs and including their products in one central location. Clearly, that's a lot easier for agents to use, and they seem to really appreciate that quite a bit. The next slide here is this. So we asked, would you explore writing other lines of business if offered in Appulate? We had asked a few questions about us specifically, but this one was a new question that we haven't asked before, and it's one that we get from a lot of our partners. So especially specialty lines of business, things like that. The question is always, okay, great. 70-something% of agents write this line of business, but if we offered something here, would they even check it out? Would they submit? Would they investigate it? And although only 32% of the agents surveyed I consider regular users of Appulate, 78% of agents who surveyed, who answered this, they said, yeah, we would absolutely write other lines of business if it was offered in this platform. So that was obviously very important to us, but I think also goes in line with a lot of this data that we're seeing where agents do prefer to be in this kind of environment, and they are open to exploring new lines of business. We saw overall growth with 87% of lines of business anyway. So agents are certainly out there looking for new markets and partners to work with, and this does seem to be an avenue that's very important to them. All right, so the next thing I'm going to show you here is a lot of text in one PowerPoint slide. This is a lot of information, but all very important stuff. So we asked agents, so what do you want from a new market? So let's say you find a new market to work with. What things are the most important? So in 2021, which you see on the left-hand side, these were the responses. In 2022, these were the responses, and we have several years of data on this. Again, just trying to track some trends and understand a little bit more about why an agent may actually be interested in working with a market, since there could be a lot of reasons for that, and clearly there are. So in the top three, we're seeing instant quotes, competitive rates, and fast quote turnaround every year that we've asked this. Those have been essentially the top three answer choices. And what's interesting about this is if you look at the percentages rather than where they kind of sit numerically on here, what we do see is a growth in priority for these agents with most of these things, and some that really stood out to me quite a bit. Everything in bold is what I would consider something that we do, or a similar technology provider where we're able to facilitate things like instant quotes and faster quote turnaround, shorter questionnaires, automated underwriting. We're doing all of that in our system, as well as the e-sign and a core data intake to avoid manual entry. And of course, again, accessing multiple markets on a single platform, which is always scoring in that top 10. So that's really interesting. But what we're seeing that to me kind of stuck out was if we look at something like accessing multiple markets on a single platform, which was number 7 in 2021 at 15%, although it was number 10 in 2022, it has moved up to 23%. So at least 23% of markets say that that's what they actually want from a new market to work with. I've got a couple questions coming in here. The first is, what other lines of business are brokers looking for specifically? Yeah, I mean, I would go based off that earlier slide. If you missed that, you'll be able to see that when I send it out, which talk about which lines of business agents are writing on a regular basis. We thought about asking what lines of business would agents want to write or explore, and I think that we're going to try to do something like that in the summertime to get a better sense of not just what they're writing today, but what are they possibly interested in. When we've asked that question in the past, it actually stayed just pretty consistent. We didn't see anything that really stood out and was surprising. Stuff that you probably might see and expect. So I think we need to tackle that again and see what that looks like. And we might also dig into a little bit more about classes of business as well. So yeah, great question. So the other question I got, what entails in personal touch and service? Yeah, great question, because that actually in years prior to this has been in the top 10 and has moved out of the top 10 now both years in a row. This is, of course, I think, if a market is accessible, if they're not having to be on hold, or it's difficult to get in touch with somebody, which oftentimes was a complaint with some of your larger companies that agents were working with. They just felt like they couldn't have that level of personal touch and service that you might get from an MGA or specialty type market that may specialize in something like cyber liability. And so if an agent's got questions about that and they don't know how to ask the right kind of questions or find the right kinds of insureds who are interested, or even just be able to explain a quote, for example, they seem to want to have somebody who can help them with that, and not just send them a video or a flyer or something like that, but actually spend some time and help them understand why these things are important and all of that. So that did seem to be, of course, a pretty important piece here, and it did double in prioritization. So it's at 18% now instead of just 9%. So that does seem to be something of value to pay attention to. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that go into this, and yeah, all of this is important, and there are obviously a lot more answer choices on here. So I put the top 15. So if you want to explore any of this with me later on, again, happy to go in a little bit deeper. I didn't want to overwhelm more than I already am on this slide deck. Cool. So let's keep going here. Well, one more thing I'll actually mention. Again, I put things in bold that I think we do. So when we partner up with markets, and I say partner because clearly it's significant that there are more things that are important to agents here aside from just the things that we do, like e-sign documents, et cetera. We have no impact on how competitive your rates are or how much commission you're paying or that personal touch aspect or any of that. We can give a really nice platform for agents to go to and to interact with your and your product, but all of these other things are also highly important. So even if we've got the best technology platform in the industry, which I think we have, if we don't have a good product to put there, then it's just not going to be as successful. And we've seen that in the past. And I'll be very honest about things that have worked, things that haven't worked, whether that is on a product level or just on a product servicing level. There's a lot of things that contribute to this, and we do try to really understand these agents as best we could, not just through these surveys, but through our own folks that interact with them on a daily basis to understand what kinds of problems they're having or why they may not be returning back to a market to work with them. But I think this covers it pretty well. And it works in the reverse too. You guys could have the best competitive rates out there and pay insane commissions, but if you don't have an easy, accessible way for agents to find you, then there's going to be some difficulty there in distribution. And so all of these things go pretty hand in hand. On my next slide, I highlighted the top 10 trends that are on here. These aren't in order of percentage. I kept them in order where they existed on the previous screen, but you can see kind of how these panned out. It was very interesting to see the things that were really highlighted here quite a bit, and even some of the things like automation with e-sign documents scored just as high as better commission, binding authority control, and competitive rates. So that was pretty interesting, and not far behind, of course, fast quote turnaround, shorter questionnaires, and then of course your automation of ingesting data and accessing all of these markets. So all of these were the most important factors, and all of these but three were things that are handled by a tech platform. So what do agents like most about Appulate? Again, another question that we wanted to ask. We wanted to get a sense of agents who do use our system. If they did mention that they use our system on any level, we asked this question. So this question was posed only to users of Appulate, as indicated in that question. And these were the things that they said. This was also very interesting. They seem to have some very strong preferences here, especially Accord and supplemental app automation. So to tell you a little bit more about that, we do give agents the ability to take an Accord form, upload it into our system. We extract all the data off with 100% accuracy. We can also do this from any agency management system. I think we're the only company still that is able to make that claim, where it doesn't make any difference what agency management system an agent uses, which 85 to 90% of agents have one now. But we give them a button, they hit it, their data moves over into our system, and then from there they select a market, answer the required questions, check Appetite if that's available, and submit. And so that's a pretty powerful process, because not only are we automating the Accord part, but all supplemental applications that an agent would have to typically manage or fill out all these documents. I've seen some that are 10, 15 pages long because of all the various sections in there based on what class of business. So an agent has to know that, go through and answer all of this and manually type this in multiple times, probably for every single market that they're submitting to. So it's pretty tedious. So these are generated in the background for us. So and it's a dynamic questionnaire. So if they put in a class code, then boom, we can ask them specifically what those required questions are, whether they're Accord-based or ones that aren't, they're supplemental. Any kind of forms are generated in the background. They just don't have to deal with it. They could select 10 markets at a time, answer a question just once, and it's going to complete everything simultaneously. So that's a big deal, and it's no surprise that that's the top choice at 63%. That's massive. And that also included a core data transfer, so the uplink, so being able to move that into the system as well. So both of those were large. If you want to know more about any of these, again, please reach out to me and I can go through some of this with you. Everybody's got a bit of a different workflow and intake process, so happy to talk about how we can blend in with that. Great. So some of the highlights that I found here, and I've only got a few more slides left. I know I'm speeding through a lot of things, but I wanted to make sure I covered all this and had plenty of time for questions at the end. So some of the highlights that we found and some other questions that we asked that I didn't make a slide out of, we asked things about how agents prefer to get information, how they prefer to learn. So we did cover how agents find instant competitive quotes the most important feature for 3 years in a row. 61% of agents prefer self-paced learning, whether that's an e-learning module, videos, etc. 27% prefer webinars, which is just slightly higher, and 11% prefer one-on-one training, which is actually 2% less. So it does seem like agents are more interested in self-paced learning all around. Agents preferred automated quoting at a rate of over 7 times that of simple questionnaires. So I showed you on the list where they stood and the percentage, but when I actually pull the raw numbers and compare some of this, we find some really interesting stuff. So they clearly prioritized that. It was 5 times that in 2021, so that's grown substantially. And speed is key. So obviously, I mean, the top answer choices being instant and quick quotes and all of these kind of automation techniques. Efficiency was prioritized over commission 8 to 1. So the responses were 8 to 1 on that. Very surprising, but also really kind of makes sense, right? I mean, time is money and all of that. So we certainly saw that was much more important to agents. All right. And then, of course, a lot of these instant quotes, quoting on a single platform, or core data intake and automated underwriting more than ever. So every one of those saw an increase and the largest percentage that we've ever seen. So very cool stuff. The last 2 slides that I have here are actually also other industry statistics and outside resources. The last piece here, and I've got 2 pages for you here to take a look at, and a couple different surveys and reports that were published. So feel free to check those out. The Insurance Thought Leadership, their One Shield State of Technology survey, which I believe they conducted over a period of time of insurance markets rather than just agents specifically. But not only are they seeing demographics changing with over 4 million employees resigning last year alone, and definitely people shifting around in their jobs and what they're doing, but there definitely was also a prioritization of adapting to the changing needs of customers and agents. And so it seems like this is pretty in line with some of the things that we're seeing here as far as what agents are looking for. And so it's good to see a good reaction from markets across the industry in this, with claims actually being the highest priority for technical investments, but not far behind that, we see things like underwriting. Of course, automation with underwriting was huge. Self-service portals were definitely really big. Submission, and then marketing was also pretty large, and payments. I've seen a lot of that going around too. So all around, I mean, this is pretty consistent to what I've seen, and I think what others have seen as well. So there's a lot of really good information here. I just highlighted one of their pieces, but they've got a really great report that you should certainly check out. Okay, and then the last one, and this is probably the craziest looking slide here. There's a lot of text and stuff going on. So feel free to, again, dive into this a little bit more as you need to. And the source is right there for the Capgemini report of 2022, which I think they do a great job pulling a lot of really good, consistently accurate data. But what I wanted to highlight here, I put little stars next to, because it's very relevant to what we do and then what I was pulling in some of these results. The number one, as far as the most significant for adoption priority and business impact, was insurers are retooling distribution channels to enhance convenience, advice, and reach. And actually, that kind of goes back. We had a question earlier about personal touch and service. So clearly, that's blended in with this as well. And that's not, personal touch service doesn't always have to be just getting on the phone and helping somebody else out, but just having a good service model where an agent can have transparency into the product, have a nice, easy way to submit to you and file claims or do billing. All this kind of ease of use is also really important. So convenience was big. Advice, we talked about that a little bit earlier, and then reach. So just distribution in general, just being able to reach more agents more accurately, giving them the information that they need, clearly very important. And number 5 and 6, both in the same box there for significance and a high business impact. The two that I saw there for 5 and 6 was shortening application development cycle. So you can achieve go-to-market agility. That's been really big with MGAs specifically that we've been working with, just being able to put a product together, make it very accessible, making the process easy with a dynamic questionnaire, and getting it out quicker has been really important. And so we've prioritized a lot of our technology around this to ensure that we can launch and develop APIs very quickly. I like to say that we can typically get to market about half the time as other folks, because the majority of our system is out of the box ready to go. So it's just mostly plug and play, which is great. And then number 6, intelligent automation, enhancing insurers' process efficiency. Clearly, that's really important too, even just on the insurer side. And we don't really do much with insurers. We do give agents the ability to send those questions out to their insureds. But yeah, that was obviously very important. And on the personal line side, we've seen a large amount of technology investment there. So very cool stuff here. I hope everybody really got something out of this. Again, please feel free to check out that survey I'm going to send you, because I want to get some feedback from you. We're already developing our next surveys that we're trying to do. Hopefully we'll do 2 this year and get even more results. So if there was something that was missing from this, or something that you wish that we would have included, please let me know what that is, and reach out if you have any specific questions. Add some questions to the question panel now. We've got just about 10 minutes till the top of the hour. Be happy to answer any questions that you've got. Here's my contact information. And again, I'll be sending all of this out in a recording with my direct contact and calendar as well. So I'm going to check out this question panel. So feel free to ask something in there, and we'll hang tight for a few minutes. I'm going to go ahead and stop this recording. And again, hey, thank you so much for hanging on. I appreciate everybody for joining today. Thank you.